There is a border in the deep black that does not appear on any chart the public is allowed to see. The species of the Reach, and there are 11,000 of them, across a span of stars so wide that light itself grows old crossing it, call it many things in many tongues, but the oldest translation, the one carved into the founding stone of the watch stations, is simply the quiet line. It is not a wall, there is nothing there to see. It is an agreement 600 years old, written in the ash of a war that the Reach does not teach to its children in full. On one side, the 11,000. On the other side, behind a border no one has crossed in 6 centuries, one species, alone, sealed in, silent. Humanity. The watch station on the third arm was called Far Hold, and the officer on duty the night the line was crossed was named Theo Marsh. And yes, that is a human name, and there is a reason for that, and we will come to it, because it is the first thread of the whole sorrowful knot. Theo Marsh had spent 40 years at Far Hold, 4 of those decades watching a stretch of empty dark across which, by treaty, nothing was ever supposed to move. It is the kind of duty that hollows a person out. You begin your career believing you are guarding against an enemy. You end it half convinced the enemy was a story your grandparents told to frighten you, because in 40 years the only thing that ever crossed your instruments was the slow turning of dead stars. At the hour the alarm sounded, Marsh did not believe it. No one who had stood that watch ever believed it the first time. The board lit with a contact, a single drive signature, faint, deliberate, crossing the quiet line from the forbidden side to the open one, and Marsh's first act, the act of a man who had been bored for 40 years, was to log it as an error and reach to silence the alarm. Then he saw the shape of it, and his hand stopped. Because the doctrine of the quiet, which every officer of the Reach memorizes before they are permitted to hold a post within 1,000 light years of the line, has exactly one trigger. Not a fleet, not a weapon, not an army pouring across the border. One ship. The treaty that ended the War of the Open Hand contained a single clause that the Reach has never been able to forget, no matter how badly it wished to. Humanity, withdrawing behind the line, agreed to send nothing out, but they added a promise and they insisted it be written in plain words, untranslated so that nothing could be lost. If we ever come back, we will send one ship first, as a courtesy, so that you have time to be afraid. For 600 years, the entire defensive philosophy of 11,000 species had been built around a single prayer, that they would never, ever see one human ship cross the quiet line alone. Theo Marsh sat in the dark of Far Hold and watched it cross. He did not silence the alarm. He let it ring through the empty corridors of the old station, because some part of him understood that this was the last quiet moment the galaxy would have, and he wanted to remember the sound of it ending. Then he opened the channel that had not been opened in 600 years, the one painted red, the one labeled only with a number, and he sent the 3 words the doctrine required, the 3 words that would, over the next 11 days, move 10,000 fleets and topple 2 governments and bring 11,000 species to the edge of the largest panic in recorded galactic history. They are coming. The log of the one ship, first entry. My name is June Whitfield, and I am the only person aboard. I want to put that down first, in case this log is all that survives me, because I think there will be a great deal of confusion about what this ship is, and I would like at least one honest record to exist. I am not a soldier. I have never held a weapon I did not use for opening crates. The ship I am flying carries no armament of any kind. I checked this myself 3 times before I left, because I did not entirely trust the people who built it not to hide something in the walls out of fear. There is nothing in the walls. There is the drive and the air and me and the cradle in the hold, which is empty and which I have come a very long way to fill. I crossed the line 11 minutes ago. I felt it the way you feel stepping out of your own house in the dark, that small animal awareness that you have left the place where the rules protect you. There was no marker. Nothing changed. The stars on the far side look exactly like the stars on ours. I suppose that is the whole tragedy of borders. They told me before I left that they would be afraid. The historian sat me down and explained, very gently, as if I were a child, that the moment my drive signature touched their instruments, something terrible would begin to wake up out there, that I should expect to be met with fleets, with threats, with the full weight of a civilization that has spent 6 centuries dreading the sight of me. They told me not to take it personally. I told them I understood. I'm not sure I did then. I think I am beginning to. I keep thinking about the woman I am coming to collect. I never met her. No one alive ever met her. She has been dead for longer than my country has existed, longer than the language I am writing this in has existed in its present form. And yet here I am, the last of her line, flying one unarmed ship across a forbidden border, into the heart of a galaxy that wants me dead. Because 600 years ago my family made her a promise, and we are the kind of people who keep promises even when everyone who heard us make them is dust. Her name was Clara. I will get to her. For now I am simply flying inward toward the hearth, the way they told me to, slow and steady and silent. I have been advised to keep radio silence until I am close enough that they cannot pretend they did not understand me. So I am quiet. I wonder if they understand yet that the quiet is the courtesy, that I am being silent so they have time. Probably not. Probably they think the silence is a threat. It usually is with us. I can see why they would assume. But not this time. This time the silence is the kindest thing I have to give them, and I am giving them all of it I can. 411 light-years from the hearth, the governor. The contact report from Farhold reached the provincial seat of the Third Arm before the governor had finished her morning meal, and she did the thing that every official in the chain would do over the next 11 days, the thing that would nearly destroy the galaxy. She did not believe it, and then she believed it too much. Governor Aldous, and I will use the human renderings of these names throughout, because the true sounds would mean nothing to you, and because, as you will learn, the use of human names this deep in reach space is itself a piece of the story. Governor Aldous had risen through 40 years of administration without ever once making a decision that mattered. The provinces of the Third Arm were quiet. The quiet line ran through her jurisdiction, but the line, everyone knew, was a formality, a relic, a budget line that funded stations like Farhold so that old officers had somewhere to grow old. She read the 3 words, "They are coming," and her first, instinctive, deeply human administrator reaction was to find a way to make it not be her problem. She could not. That was the genius and the cruelty of the doctrine of the quiet. It had been written by people who knew that the natural response to a 600-year-old fear is denial, and so it had removed denial as an option. The instant Farhold's report was logged, automatic systems older than the governor's entire civilization had already begun to wake. The decision was not hers. It had been made 6 centuries ago by frightened people who no longer existed, and it was reaching forward through time to seize the hands of the living. Governor Aldous watched the mobilization orders cascade through her province without her authorization, watched shipyards that had built nothing but freighters for 200 years receive activation codes, watched reserve crews who thought the call would never come receive the call, and she understood, with a sick lurch, that the galaxy she had grown comfortable in had only ever been a held breath, and that the breath was now being let out. She did the one thing the doctrine permitted her to do. She tried to confirm the threat. She ordered her fastest scout to the projected path of the single ship, to look at it, to count its guns, to measure the size of the army behind it. The scout found one ship, unarmed, alone, traveling slowly, almost gently, on a course so direct and so undisguised that it could only be read one of 2 ways. Either the humans were too arrogant to bother hiding, or they wanted to be seen. Both readings terrified her equally. The scout also reported one more thing, a detail that would race up the chain of command and curdle the panic into something close to madness. The single human ship was broadcasting no threat, no demand, no message of any kind. It was completely silent. Governor Aldous, who had never in her life made a decision that mattered, made one now. She classified the silence as hostile intent and forwarded the report upward with that classification attached, because a silent enemy is more frightening than a loud one, and frightened officials reach for the frightening reading the way a falling person reaches for any handhold at all. It was the first of 100 small misreadings, each made by a reasonable person acting in good faith, that would stack up over 11 days into a near extinction. No one in this story is a villain. That is the worst part. Everyone was simply afraid and acting exactly as their fear instructed them to. The log of the one ship, on Clara. I said I would get to her. I keep not getting to her because she is the hardest part to write, and I am a coward about the things that matter. Clara Whitfield was my ancestor, 18 generations back. I have done the arithmetic so many times it has stopped meaning anything. She was 31 years old at the end of the War of the Open Hand. You will not have been taught the war honestly, wherever you are. No one was. Both sides agreed in the treaty to soften it in the telling, because the truth was unbearable to both. So let me tell you the part that matters, the only part, the part my family kept alive in private for 600 years while the official histories grew vague. The war was ending badly, not for us, for everyone. We had hurt them in ways they had not believed possible, and they had hurt us. And the thing about a war between a species that does not know when to stop and a civilization that has never been truly threatened is that it does not end. It escalates until there is nothing left to escalate with. Both sides had weapons by then that did not kill ships or worlds but futures, that unmade the possibility of a place ever bearing life again. And both sides were preparing to use them, because both sides were more afraid of losing than they were of winning into a graveyard. It was Clara who stopped it. She was not a general. She was a junior envoy, one of the few humans the Reach had ever spoken to directly, and she understood something that no one with more power was willing to understand, that the war would not end with a treaty, because neither side could trust a treaty signed by people they had spent a decade learning to fear. A signature on a document could not hold back weapons that unmade futures. Only one thing could. A hostage not taken, given. Clara offered herself. She proposed that she would cross the line and live the rest of her life in the heart of the Reach, alone, the only human among 11,000 species, with no escort and no escape and no way home. A living guarantee that humanity would keep the peace, because the moment humanity broke it, the Reach would have in their hands the one human they had come to know. And she proposed that the Reach send no one in return, because she understood even then that her people would not be held by a hostage. They would be held by shame, by the knowledge that one of their own had given her entire life, alone in the dark, on the far side of a forbidden border, so that the rest of them could live. We are a species that can survive almost anything except the memory of a sacrifice we failed to honor. She crossed the line at 31. She never crossed back. She lived another 53 years among them, alone, and she died old, and they buried her somewhere in the heart of the Reach, and for 600 years she has lain there while two civilizations built their entire peace on the foundation of her single life. And when she crossed, she extracted one promise from her own people, in writing, the only thing she ever asked for herself. She made us promise that one day, when it was safe, when the fear had cooled enough that a ship could come without starting the war all over again, we would come back for her, that we would not leave her in the ground of strangers forever, that we would bring her home. 600 years, it turns out, is how long it takes for the fear to cool enough. I am the ship they sent. I am coming to bring her home. The cradle in my hold is built to exactly her measurements, taken from records older than any standing government. It is empty now. It is the only cargo I carry, and it is the reason 11,000 species are mustering their fleets, and not one of them knows it yet. They think I am the beginning of a war. I am the end of one. I am 600 years late to a funeral. 200 light years from the hearth, the Admiral. The fleet that gathered to meet the single ship was the largest assembled in the Reach since the war itself. By the time the human vessel was 200 light years from the hearth, there were 9,000 warships arranged along its projected path, in a sphere so vast that its far edges could not see its near ones, crewed by the soldiers of 400 species, all of them waiting for one unarmed ship flown by one silent woman. The fleet was commanded by an admiral whose name renders into your language as Bren Holloway, and again, mark the human name, it matters, who had spent her career studying the war of the open hand, the way a physician studies a plague, with horror and fascination in equal measure. She was, in the entire Reach, perhaps the single individual best equipped to understand what was happening, and that knowledge made her the most frightened person in the galaxy. Because Admiral Holloway had read the real histories, the unsoftened ones, kept in the war archives she had clearance to access. She knew what humanity had done at the end. She knew about the weapons that unmade futures. She knew that the single most dangerous thing about the human species was not its firepower but its patience. That they were a people who could nurse a purpose across centuries without dropping it, who would do a terrible thing slowly and deliberately, and on schedule if they had decided the thing needed doing. And she knew the clause, "We will send one ship first," as a courtesy. She understood the courtesy in a way the governors and the politicians did not. The courtesy was not mercy. The courtesy was confidence. You only warn an enemy you are coming if you are certain the warning will not save them. The single ship was not weakness. It was the most arrogant gesture in the history of warfare, a species so sure of itself that it would give its target time to prepare and prepare and prepare and lose anyway. The one ship said, "Gather everything you have. It will not be enough. We wanted you to see that for yourselves." So Holloway did the rational thing, the thing the doctrine demanded. She prepared to destroy the single ship before it could reach the hearth, and she prepared to do it with overwhelming, absolute, annihilating force, because against humanity there was no such thing as too much. But she was a careful woman, and a haunted one, and before she gave the order she did something the doctrine did not require, and most of her colleagues would have called weakness. She tried, one last time, to make the ship speak. She opened every channel, on every protocol the archives recorded, including the dead human frequencies that had not carried a signal in 6 centuries, and she asked the single ship to identify itself and state its purpose. And the ship, for the first time since crossing the line, answered. It did not answer with words. The protocols were 600 years out of date. The human ship and the Reach fleet could not, it turned out, even speak the same machine language anymore. So much had drifted in 6 centuries of silence. What the ship sent instead was the only thing it could be certain would translate across the gulf of time and language and fear. It sent an image. A single, still image, broadcast on every frequency at once, repeating, patient, silent. And when it resolved on the screens of 9,000 warships, Admiral Bren Holloway felt the order to fire die in her throat, because she recognized the image, because every educated being in the Reach would recognize it, because it was carved on the founding stone of 10,000 monuments across 400 worlds. It was a face, a human face, an old woman, thin, gray, smiling slightly, with eyes that the artist, a Reach artist, 6 centuries dead, had rendered with such tenderness that the love of the maker was visible in every line. It was Clara. It was the mother of the quiet. It was the one human the Reach had ever loved. And the single ship was broadcasting her face across 9,000 guns as if to say, "You know me. You know whose people we are. Now ask yourselves why we have come." The log of the one ship on their grief. Something has changed out there. For days they have been gathering around me like a closing fist. I can see them on the instruments, thousands of them, more than I have words for, more ships than my entire species possesses many times over. I have flown through the middle of them, silent, slow, the way I was told. I have watched their guns track me. I have made my peace several times with the strong likelihood that I will die out here alone, the way Clara lived. But an hour ago I broke my silence. They asked me who I was on 100 frequencies, and I could hear in the pattern of their asking that they were about to fire. There is a rhythm to fear that translates across any species, and I have been listening to it build for days. So I sent the one thing I knew they would understand. I sent her face. And the fleet stopped closing. I do not fully understand what I am seeing. The ships have not lowered their guns, but they have stopped. The whole vast closing fist of them has gone still, the way a room goes still when someone says a name the dead used to answer to. And now, on my instruments, I am receiving something I was not prepared for. They are transmitting back, not weapons locks, not threats, images. Thousands of them, flooding my receivers faster than I can sort them, and they are all the same subject, and the subject is her. They are sending me Clara. Monuments, statues taller than mountains, a face carved into the side of a moon, murals that cover the walls of cities, songs I cannot understand the words but I do not need to, grief has no accent. Children, small alien children of a dozen species, laying offerings at the foot of a tomb. And the tomb. They are showing me the tomb, over and over from every angle as if they need me to see how well they have kept it. I came here, believing I was retrieving a body from the ground of strangers. I came here believing she had been left, forgotten, in the cold of an indifferent galaxy, and that my family's promise was to rescue her from neglect. I was wrong. I was so completely wrong that I am sitting here in the dark of my one ship with my hands over my face. They did not forget her. They built a civilization on her. For 600 years, the species that my people feared as monsters have been tending the grave of the one human they were ever given, with a tenderness my own species never managed to show her in life. We sent her away to die alone among enemies. The enemies made her their mother. I do not know what I am supposed to do now. My orders are simple: retrieve the remains, bring her home. The cradle is waiting in the hold. But I am beginning to understand that I have flown 600 years and 11,000 light years to do something monstrous. I have come to take a mother away from her children. And the children have 9,000 warships, and they have just realized what the cradle in my hold is for. 40 light years from the hearth, the keeper. There is, on a small green world near the center of the reach, a tomb that has been tended without a single day's interruption for 600 years. The office of its keeper is the oldest continuous office in the reach, older than the Parliament, older than the Alliance in its current form, older than most of the member species' written histories. To be chosen as keeper of the mother is the highest honor a being of the reach can receive, and it is given for life, and the one who held it when the single ship came was named. And you will not be surprised now, Wren Ashby. Every keeper for 6 centuries has taken a human name upon accepting the office. It began as a gesture of respect to the one human they knew, and over time it calcified into law, and over more time it became something deeper than law, a quiet, galaxy-wide refusal to let the human language die entirely, kept alive in the names of grave tenders and border officers and admirals, so that if the humans ever did come back, there would be at least a few voices left who could greet them in their own tongue. The whole structure of human-named officials along the path to the hearth was not coincidence. It was a 600-year-old apology, waiting. Wren Ashby had spent her life at the tomb. She knew Clara better than Clara had known herself, knew the 53 years of the woman's exile in detail no human record had preserved, because the Reach had written down everything, every word the lonely envoy ever said, every meal she ate, every alien child she taught to read, every night she spent at the edge of the settlement looking up at the stars on the side of the line, she could never cross again. The Reach had loved Clara with the desperate completeness of a people who had been given exactly one human, and were determined not to waste a moment of her. When the news reached the tomb that a single human ship had crossed the line, that it carried no weapons, that it was broadcasting Clara's face, that there was, in its hold, an empty cradle built to a dead woman's measurements, Ren Ashby understood instantly, and completely what everyone else had spent 11 days failing to grasp. It was not an invasion. It was a son coming home for his mother's bones. And she understood the terrible symmetry of it, too. The whole galaxy had armed itself, had nearly committed extinction, because it could not imagine that a species it had defined entirely by violence might cross a forbidden border for any reason other than war. The Reach had spent 600 years tending Clara's grave and 600 years certain that her people were monsters, and had never once let those two facts touch, had never once thought to ask what kind of monster keeps a promise to a dead woman for 6 centuries. Ren Ashby did something no keeper had ever done. She left the tomb. She traveled to the hearth, to the chamber of the High Speaker, and she forced her way into the War Council at the hour they were preparing, finally, to give the order to fire, because the single ship was now close enough that the doctrine of the quiet permitted no further delay, and she said the thing that stopped the galaxy from destroying itself. She did not argue strategy. She did not dispute the threat. She simply asked the War Council one question, in the old human tongue she had spoken her whole life, and then translated it for them so they could not pretend not to understand. She asked, if we fire on that ship, what do we tell her? And the War Council, 400 species worth of admirals and ministers and frightened powerful beings, had no answer, because they all knew exactly what she meant. They had built their entire civilization on a human woman's sacrifice. They had taught their children that her love was the foundation of the peace. And now her own people had come, after 600 years, to honor a promise made to her, and the Reach's response was to destroy them within sight of her grave. There was no version of that the Reach could survive telling itself. The log of the one ship, the hearth. They have let me through. I do not entirely know why. An hour ago I was certain I was about to die. The closing fist had tightened to the point where I could no longer see open space on my instruments. Just ships, walls of them, every one with its weapons turned toward my one small unarmed hull. And then, without any message I could understand, the fist opened. A corridor formed in the wall of warships, leading inward, toward a small green world I had been told was the center of everything. I flew down it. 9,000 ships watched me pass, silent, their guns following me but never firing, and I have never in my life felt so small or so seen. They are guiding me to the surface now, to her. I can see the tomb from orbit. They did not tell me it would be the largest structure on the planet. They did not tell me that the whole green world is, essentially, a single grave, that an entire planet has been kept as a garden for 600 years around the body of one human woman. I am looking down at it now, and I cannot breathe properly. There is a delegation waiting for me at the landing field. I can see them on the optics. Thousands of beings of every shape the galaxy has made, and at the front of them, alone, a single figure holding something in her hands, waiting, the way you wait for family. I am going to land now. I am going to walk out of this ship unarmed, the way Clara walked out of hers 600 years ago, into a crowd of strangers who could end me with a gesture, and I am going to find out what we have all become. I came here to take a mother home. I do not think that is what is going to happen. I think something else is going to happen, something I do not have a name for yet, and I think Clara planned it this way 600 years ago, because she was always so much smarter than the people who sent her, and because she knew exactly what one ship crossing a line would do. She did not just keep the peace by living here, she left a door open. And she trusted, across 6 centuries, that her people would one day be brave enough, and her enemies kind enough to walk through it from both sides at once. I am opening the hatch. Zero the grave, what they became. This is the part no single witness saw because it belongs to all of them, so I will tell it plainly, the way it deserves. June Whitfield walked out of her one ship onto the soil of the most heavily defended world in the galaxy, unarmed, alone, the last of Clara's line, and she was met not by guns but by Wren Ashby, keeper of the mother, who had taken a human name her whole life for a moment she never believed would come. They could not speak the same language. 600 years had moved the human tongue too far from the version the keepers preserved. The words had drifted like continents, so they did what their two civilizations had failed to do for 6 centuries. They communicated anyway, with their hands and their faces, and the one word they both knew, the only word that had survived intact across 600 years on both sides of the quiet line. The name Clara. Wren Ashby led June Whitfield to the tomb. The whole galaxy watched. The broadcast went out across 11,000 worlds, unscheduled, unstoppable, the single most witnessed event in the history of the Reach. They watched a human woman walk through a garden the size of a planet, past 600 years of monuments, to a grave her family had promised to come back for, and they watched her kneel at it, and they watched the keeper of the mother kneel beside her, and they watched the two of them weep together over the bones of the woman who had given her whole life so that this moment could one day exist. And here is the thing that broke the galaxy open. Here is the thing that ended the doctrine of the quiet forever, that toppled governments built on fear, that began the long, slow, terrifying, wonderful process of two civilizations learning to live in the same galaxy again. June Whitfield did not take Clara home. She had come 600 years and 11,000 light years with an empty cradle and a promise to fill it. And she knelt at the grave, in front of the watching galaxy, and she understood, the way you understand the most important things, all at once, with your whole body, that Clara was already home, that she had been home for 600 years, that the promise her family had kept all this time had never really been about a body in the ground. It had been about a door. And that to take Clara away now, to tear the mother from the children who had loved her better than her own people ever had, would be to slam that door shut forever and prove the galaxy's oldest fear correct. So she did the bravest thing in this entire story, braver than crossing the line, braver than facing the fleet. She broke her orders, she left the cradle empty. And then she did the thing Clara had been waiting 600 years for someone to be brave enough to do. With Wren Ashby's hands guiding hers, in front of 11,000 watching worlds, June Whitfield knelt at the grave of her ancestor, and she planted, in the soil of that alien garden, a single seed she had carried in her pocket from Earth, a small, ordinary living thing, the first piece of Earth ever to touch Reach soil in 600 years, so that something of home would grow there beside Clara forever, and so that the grave would no longer belong only to the Reach, but to both of them together. At last, the galaxy had panicked because one ship had crossed a line. It had armed 9,000 warships and woken a 600-year fear and come within an hour of committing extinction, all because it could not imagine that the species it called monsters might do something other than make war. And in the end, the one ship's entire devastating, world-changing payload was this: a promise kept, an empty cradle and a single seed. That is what finally frightened them, not the firepower they had braced for, something far worse, far more impossible to defend against. They had built their entire civilization on the certainty that they understood what humanity was. And humanity had crossed a forbidden border, endured the threat of annihilation without ever raising a weapon, and revealed itself to be a species that would keep a promise to a single dead woman for 600 years and then, at the final moment, with the door wide open and the whole galaxy in its reach, choose tenderness over its own orders. You cannot plan against that. You cannot deter it or contain it or outweight it. A species that does that will do anything, in any direction, for reasons of the heart that no war college can model. The Reach had feared human violence for 6 centuries. What it learned at Clara's grave was that human violence had never been the dangerous part. The dangerous part was that they loved like they fought, without limit, across any distance, for longer than empires last. Epilogue: The Quiet Line. 1 year later. Theo Marsh stood his watch at Far Hold for 1 more year, and then he retired, because there was no longer anything to watch for. The quiet line is gone now. There was no ceremony to dismantle it. It simply stopped meaning anything, the way a held breath stops mattering once you finally exhale. Ships cross it daily now, in both directions, and the watch stations that guarded 6 centuries of silence have been turned into way stations, refueling stops, places where humans and the species of the Reach meet for the first time in 600 years and discover, with a mixture of relief and grief, how much they have to apologize to each other for. On the green world at the center of everything, in a garden the size of a planet, a small earth seed has become a small earth tree, the first of its kind to grow under an alien sun, and it stands beside the tomb of Clara Whitfield, who gave her life to a peace she never lived to see flower, and who has been, all this time, exactly where she always belonged, between two peoples, holding them together, home. June Whitfield never went back to Earth. She lives at the tomb now, the first human keeper of the mother, learning the old language the Reach kept alive for her, tending the grave and the tree and the door her ancestor left open. She filled the empty cradle, after all, not with bones, but with the offerings the children of 11,000 species still leave at Clara's grave, which she gathers each evening and keeps, because they are the truest record of what one life can do. And sometimes, on the clear nights, she walks to the edge of the garden and looks up at the stars on the far side of where the line used to be, the way Clara did for 53 lonely years. But June is not lonely. That is the difference: 600 years and one kept promise made. She is just looking home, in both directions at once. The galaxy panicked because humans sent one ship. It should have. One ship was all it ever took. It just took them 600 years to understand what the ship was carrying, and that the most unstoppable weapon their species ever built was the simple, terrible, unkillable habit of keeping its word.